Well, hello, and welcome back to The Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we chronicle transcendent truth by traveling further up and further into the classic works of children's literature.
This is Season 9, Episode 8, The Clue, which covers chapters 16 through 18 of The Princess and the Goblin.
Episode 8, The Clue. I didn't feel great about this title for this episode.
The Clue.
I also could have called it The Ring, but I felt like if we ever do...
Yeah, you want to save that one.
I want to save that one in case, like even just in this own book, or
case.
maybe if just we need to go to any other books that might have rings. I was like,
No.
let's hold off on that title.
Sounds
right
like
now.
a John Grisham in his 90s, late 90s, writing about the ring.
Oh, I was thinking it was not at all. This was not implying that we might cover Tolkien in the future. This was
I'm just trying to dispel
the
that
early
completely.
2000s, The Ring, the
Yes.
horror film.
Oh, the
Right?
horror
Yeah,
film.
that's what this was from. That's the one the girl comes out of the TV, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one. That was so
From
big
what I've heard.
when we were. You've never seen it?
No.
I have seen it, but have no memory of it. I watched it. And it was like one of those things where, and maybe you didn't do this in high school, but you would get together with friends and like someone who was...
Sick burn.
Oh, no. I didn't mean it like that. Let me finish
You're
this
the one who
sentence.
has started multiple podcasts.
It's not how I meant it. You'd get together. I had a couple of friends. I don't really like horror movies all that much, but I would get together with friends in high school, and someone would be like, "We're gonna watch a horror movie," and I didn't like horror movies, so I would only kind of pay attention. And anyone who's listened to this podcast for a long time won't find it hard to believe that I would just talk to whoever was next to me instead of watching the horror movie. So like it was on, but I wasn't really watching it. So I technically have seen it, but I could only tell you that the girl comes out of the TV.
Yeah.
We're getting off topic. I don't want to start this right so early. Phil, let's dive into this
To our
episode.
Star Wars content.
No,
which-
so it's funny is the last two episodes that we released, not related to The Princess and the Goblin. We talked about C.S. Lewis with Ben Lansing for C.S. Lewis Reading Day. And then the most recent episode, we had Dr. Bailey back on the show to talk about the faith and the fiction of George MacDonald. Really proud of both those episodes. I loved doing them. You and I had so much fun with Ben, the three of us together, and then I had a great time with Dr. Bailey. Those were conversations that I think were really spending time diving into this transcendent truth that we mentioned at the very top of the episode. I really enjoy having those conversations, but one of the fun things about this podcast is we like to cultivate a place where we're having those deep discussions about transcendent truth, and then we have a group of chapters like today, which are mostly just goofy and silly, and I think we're just going to have a lot of fun because there's
It's a good balance.
two chapters of kind of nothing, and then one chapter that is ridiculous, like absolutely hilarious, and it's kind of supposed to be scary, but we're talking about like taking off people's slivers of toes and stuff like that. It's just going to be a great time today. I'm excited for it.
And I think that's part of the magic of George MacDonald is he's dealing with somewhat serious stuff and he's pairing it so well with comedy. And those two go so well together, just if they're done correctly.
Let me ask you this, though, before we jump in. Do you think it's supposed to be comedic? Like, am I reading this incorrectly? Because we'll get into the summary in just a moment, but Curdy attacking the goblins never feels frightening to me and only feels goofy. And I don't mean that, as I'm making fun of it. Like, oh, it's goofy. Like, oh, this is kind of funny. It's silly. It's not really scary. It's like fairy tale scary. Is that the right way you think to read it? Or am I...
I was more scared than it sounds like you
Oh,
were.
you were more frightened. Yeah.
Well, I was...
You didn't watch these movies in high
aware.
school, so they were a little bit scarier.
I haven't dulled my senses.
Yeah,
with the-
I have.
The hot sauce of the film world. I thought he was in more trouble, but I knew enough that I was curious to see how he gets out of it, but I don't think he's gonna actually be in too much trouble.
Yeah.
But I do think he is, and there are consequences to. He's getting hurt physically.
Yeah.
And
There's
also
blood in this
lets
chapter.
out
Yeah.
some pain. Yeah.
He may or may not be murdering some of the Cobb's creatures.
Yeah,
It's unclear what he's hitting them with, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's actually go back to your summary first, and then we'll do these. Let's do chapters 16 and 17 first before we get into Curdy's clue, which is chapter 18.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and summarize the whole thing, though.
Go for it.
Irene tells Ludi about the cat with horse legs and how she ran up the mountain, but doesn't share about her grandmother or the lamp that guided her home. Spring arrives, and with it, the king. When his daughter asks about the ring on her hand, a smile spreads across his face, and he tells her that it belonged to her queen mama, but that she doesn't want it anymore. Later on, Curdy's continued exploration of the caves leads to him falling from his perch, landing in trouble with the goblins. His efforts of rhyming and stomping on feet buy him some time, but the goblin queen's shoes protect her, and she gains the upper hand and forces him backwards, preventing his escape with a pile of rocks.
Curdy is captured here by the royal family of the goblins. But before we get to that, we've got 2 chapters with Princess Irene. Both of the chapters are extremely short.
Very, very
only
short.
about 2 pages or so. The first chapter we come across is chapter 16, The Ring. And as you mentioned, in this chapter, Ludi expresses her frustration that Irene went away. And we finally get, at the very end of this again, I guess the end of this page or so, that conversation that the great-grandmother alluded to would take place, where Irene says, "Who gave me the ring, Ludi? I know I've had it a long time, but where did I get it? I don't remember." To which we get this response from Ludi. "I think it must have been your mother gave it you, princess. But really, for as long as you have worn it, I don't remember that ever I heard." Super interesting. This is really the big takeaway. The whole chapter really revolves around this exchange. The grandmother told us that she should ask Ludi where it came from, which made no sense at the time. She does ask Ludi. Ludi says it came from your mother, and it still kind of doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. But I love the detail right before it. The reason that her nurse asks about it, or brings it up, and that Irene asks about it, is because it's glowing like a fiery rose.
Which we know that it comes from the same jewel that her grandmother had upon her crown. It's a lesser jewel, right? Mm-hmm. So this isn't surprising to us.
Not to us, but there's something different about it enough that the nurse notices.
Exactly.
So it makes it feel like there is something at play that is guiding the nurse's interactions in order to prompt Irene to ask the question.
Such an interesting thing here because, are we to take it, which I don't think we are, that Ludi is just ridiculously ignorant in that she says, "Where'd I get this ring from?" Which we know as readers is a ring she literally just got on her finger, yesterday. Mm-hmm. And Ludi's like, "Oh yeah, you've always had it. Mom gave it to you." You're like, "Wait, what, Ludi?"
Yeah.
Or is something occurring that Ludi doesn't recognize the fact that she actually hasn't always had this ring? Is something magical occurring? Did Ludi know that this ring was already in her possession, or was maybe supposed to be in her possession, but she didn't have it yet? Is Ludi maybe trying to play something off? We still don't even know about Irene's mother. I think at this point, it would probably be safe to say that her mother is no longer living, but it's unclear if Irene actually knows that. You know what I mean? Like we know she's only 7 or 8 years old here.
Yeah.
I mean, you think you would tell a kid at this point, you're old enough, right?
Yeah.
But she still talks about her mother, and she never seems to acknowledge the fact that her mom isn't around at all.
Right. Or ask about her, or there's something off there. In terms of the first question you asked, I think that people do this all the time. They just come up with a reason for something because they probably know, but they're filling in some details. Mm-hmm. And we've had conversations.
You're like, "You do this all the time, man. I've heard you do it."
I'm trying not to say you do this all the time, but you do this all the time. For example, at when we were going to the same church service one time, someone asked you if your name was Chris. And
no, it was Ryan. It was
if
Ryan.
Your name was Ryan, and you said yes, and you just kept going, and then eventually you're like, "Well, I have to correct that because I can't keep this charade up my entire life." But there's this need to be the person who knows, and I find myself doing it all the time. Sometimes I do know the stuff, but if there's a detail or two missing, I might fill that in with my best guess. And I think Ludi wants to come across as someone who does know, and so she's just gonna explain it, and she probably doesn't even think twice about it.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is, it was in the house. This grandmother can do magical stuff. She could have gone down, gotten the ring, and then gone upstairs and then held on to it for a few days and then give it back. This is my plan for Christmas gifts until my kid turns 4. I want to just take the old ones,
wrap them
up again, give them, pull them in maybe July, and then give them back in December.
Yeah, they just want stuff to open anyways.
Yeah.
Right?
It's more about the paper it comes in.
Exactly. That's
Or
what
the
matters
box.
the most.
Get
You
'em
give
a
you
new-
a plastic bag that your kid plays with all the time.
Oh, yeah. Or we could just get a new fridge every year. And then they have the greatest toy of all, which is the giant box that the refrigerator
That's a
comes
very
in.
expensive gift, but I like your thinking.
Only the
I
best for my
I don't think I've
my
ever
little
seen a
son.
fridge. This is true. Every house I've ever moved into, and even the house when we bought our house that we live in now, have all come with fridges.
Mm-hmm.
I've never. I mean, I guess I have owned a fridge. I own the one, in my kitchen, but I've never purchased a fridge actually.
Yeah, you're lucky.
So I don't know what kind of box I have purchased multiple washers and dryers over the years because
Yes.
every house I've moved into have had to buy a brand new one. That's the beauty of city living, where you're like, hey, the one you used to buy, it doesn't fit in your laundry room because the house was made in 1920 in your
Before
last house.
people clean their
Yeah,
clothes.
do it before they washed clothes. Before people had clothes, I think. This
I've
is
always thought of
Adam and
you
Eve's
as
time.
fridge rich, dryer poor.
Very poor. I remember literally the house that we live in now. We had bought a washer and dryer in our last house, which was built in like 1930 something, and then we were just going to bring that washer and dryer over because they were only 2 or 3 years old, and they were in our current house. Like, what was built 1920? So the dimensions of your washer and dryer legitimately will not fit in your new house. We're like, well, that stinks. So we had to
literally.
buy it. We have a compact washer and dryer, which is just about the worst thing for a family of 4. The only thing that'd be worse is if we kept having more kids. It's like.
Or if you had to put it in the bathroom, and so you're sitting next to a washer and dryer.
I will tell you, when we were looking at this house, we go into the downstairs bathroom, which is where our washer and dryer live, because that's where the hookups are, because it was an addition to a house that's over 100 years old. And our realtor's like, oh, it looks like it'll be really tight, but when you put that washer and dryer, there'll still be so much space in here. And then we bought the house, we put the washer and dryer, and it's like, I literally can't move in my downstairs bathroom.
Yep.
Which is great, because it's, whenever we host people, they get to also experience that.
Yeah. It really is tight. But it's also kind of endearing.
I don't know.
It's nice when you only have to do it every other week.
I was gonna say I wouldn't know because I just go upstairs.
Because
It's
it's better to walk
it ain't
all
my
the way.
problem. It's all the guest problem. let's go to chapter 17.
Speaking
here.
of things that happened over 100 years ago, let's go to chapter
17. Springtime. In springtime, the king papa arrives, and Irene asks the exact same question: where did I get this pretty ring? And here's what MacDonald writes: the king looked at it. A strange, beautiful smile spread like sunshine over his face, and an answering smile, but at the same time a questioning one, spread like moonlight over Irene's. It was your queen mamma's once, he said. And why isn't it hers now? Asked Irene. She does not want it now, said the king, looking grave. Why doesn't she want it now? Because she's gone where all those rings are made.
Mordor.
And when shall I see her? Asked the princess. Not for some time yet, answered the king, and the tears came in his eyes. Irene did not remember her mother, and did not know why her father looked so, and why the tears came in his eyes, but she put her arms round his neck and kissed him, and asked no more questions. This pretty much is where what I was alluding to. This all but confirms her mother has passed away, and she's unaware of it, and they haven't told her yet, which is a little odd.
Yeah. Right. And where are all the rings made? That's
Where are rings made? I don't understand that.
purposely
Actually.
vague, and it solidifies that her father probably is not going to tell her
Mm-hmm.
what really happened.
Yeah, this is such an interesting exchange, and I think it actually is really indicative of a lot of MacDonald's storytelling. It's one of those things where it doesn't make a lot of sense. And as I read it, I ask myself, again, because in the back of my head, I have Lewis's words of like, MacDonald's not a great writer. But again, Dr. Bailey told us last week, he would just say Lewis is just wrong. MacDonald is a great writer. But I still, it's hard to get Lewis's voice out of my head, and he is our guide through this book. And so I'm hearing Lewis be like, well, maybe that's just a weird thing to say. Or maybe MacDonald is really up to something. What I don't think this is some kind of mystery box J.J. Abrams kind of thing where it's like, oh, this will be the big reveal. The rings go there, and her mom is secretly the grandmother in disguise. She rips off the Mission Impossible mask. No. I don't think that. I think it is more like, when I mean, it's more just like a thing MacDonald does. I think more fairy tale-esque here of just saying something, and we see Lewis do this in Narnia all the time, that simply just alludes to some kind of mysterious, magical, otherworldly thing, and I'm not going to fill in the details. It just helps kind of take you out of your own world and put you into my world.
And so beautifully described too, a smile spreading like moonlight. And then the short, kind answer, not for some time yet, which can allude to it maybe later or maybe once you die. It's vague enough. And tears coming into his eyes shows that there's something behind this more, and it makes us want to know. I want to discuss a theory at this point in the story.
Yeah.
So you and I have both read it, so we're not going to spoil anything.
Sure.
But my wife was reading this to my son, who's under 1 year, so he's not going to remember. But she got to this point, and she goes, Irene's mom, the queen, is definitely the goblin.
Oh,
now
interesting. That's what Sarah was thinking.
And I paused and I thought, I actually don't know, because I hadn't finished it at that time.
Oh, okay.
I hadn't finished the story, but I'm curious what you think about that theory.
That's an interesting theory.
Because they keep talking about her toes. And
they keep talking about how she's got the weird toes.
She has to wear some shoes.
She has to wear shoes. She's got some human-related things. This could make sense. Oh, the rings are made underground, right?
Which is where the goblins are.
This is interesting.
And they keep having to mine the material out. It fits.
That's a really fun theory. Do you think McDonald meant for us to think deeply into this at all?
Well, so have you read
this book? Yes.
The sequel?
No, I've never read The Princess and Curdie. No.
I'm curious if this is planting lore for later, but I really don't know. My best guess is that he is intentionally having these scenes happen close to each other so that we think that is a possibility.
I really like that. That's a really fun theory, and something that would certainly make a lot of sense your first time reading this through. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Every time you say theory, it sets off my my AI assistant, who shall remain nameless, so that...
Do you have an AI assistant on this podcast? Come on.
Siri.
Oh,
there it goes again.
Oh, does it really do that if you hear it?
Every time you say theory. So if
do I
anyone
say
else...
the word theory wrong or something?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm like, is it just another one of the words you got to add to the list of Daniel can't say it?
I'm going to chalk this one up to it's a AI's fault.
Oh, okay.
But I'm curious if anyone else's phone just went off.
All right. Well, Alexa, we'll go ahead and keep talking.
That's
okay,
right.
Google.
Okay, computer.
Sorry to everyone else listening.
You set off your thing across
I hate that I have that in my own house. Let's go ahead and move on to Chapter 18, Curdie's Clue. We were mentioning the goblins, and here we do come across the royal family, including the king, the queen, the prince, and the goblin counselor.
Yes.
So Curdie, we return to him. We haven't been with him for a few chapters. He is continuing his investigation of the invasion, the goblin invasion. And what he's doing, and this is really important for us to understand, he is still tying his string, that ball of string that Mama Curdie... wait, what was his last name again? It was like Peterson. It was like something it's like not
son,
fairy
Peterson.
tale-esque at all. It's just Peterson. No offense to our Peterson listeners out there. Your name doesn't sound very like fairy tale-y.
But Peter's son does.
Yeah, do you think we're just pronouncing it wrong? It's Princess Irene and Peter son.
Yeah, Peter, son of Peter.
So he's taking this string, this thread, he's tying it to his pickaxe and kind of planting his pickaxe in the ground by the opening, where he kind of crosses from the miner side of the cave into the goblin side, that hole that he discovered, way back many chapters ago. Then kind of just like Theseus, he walks through the mine, and then he follows back his thread to get back to where he came from. So he's doing this for a while, and something has occurred where, as it's time for him to go back, he's following the thread back, and it is clearly not leading him back the way he came. McDonald tells us it's so dark he can't see anything. He begins to get worried, not because he's afraid of the goblins, but because even if he were to come within, a few feet of the actual hole back onto the miner side of the human side of the cave, if he didn't have the string, he could easily just walk right by it and be lost forever. So as he's trying to figure out, what is going on? Why is the string not leading me back the way that it should be? he starts hearing some noises, and eventually he finds himself in a group of the Cobb's creatures, the Goblin's creatures, who, as they kind of attack him, he finds his pickaxe, and he kind of realizes, oh, they must have found my pickaxe, taken it, and like a dog with a bone, run off with it, which is why they were leading me back in a bunch of different places, because I was following I was following them. I was chasing them back. He's able to fight them off. It's a little unclear if he just kills all of them. We hear that at least some escape because some noises. Like, he's got this pickaxe. He starts hitting the creatures. Is he like? Do we get like hard R where he's like flaying all of them?
I think this is more of Batman, where he is hurting them horribly, and they're going to live with some of these injuries for quite some time.
It's a pickaxe, though. It's not like
but it's
he's hitting him maybe with the side of it. I guess
he's not hitting him with the sharp part. He's clobbering them.
But the way that McDonald described, I think McDonald is just trying to make us feel better, because I think there's some animal carcasses laying it at Curdy's feet, because McDonald explains it as though, I said we're going to get goofy this episode. He's like wildly swinging it, and he tries to reassure us that he's maybe hitting it with the side. It's like, that's just what Curdy told himself later. Yeah. He felt bad about it because he just starts wildly swinging. He definitely got some of these.
Imagine if the conversation had gone well with the higher ups, and they're, oh yeah, you're here by accident, total mistake. We'll let you go.
He's like, you guys don't have any
And then
pets,
he starts walking away, and then they discover the carnage.
Like,
wait a second.
There's like all of our pets are right outside the.
Yep.
It's so I again, I'm being facetious here. I do think it's like it's fun to read, like, oh yeah, everyone's fine, nobody was hurt. But again, his weapon is a pickaxe.
Yeah.
So,
but maybe it's a little dull. Maybe it's just wounding him. I do think.
Do you want to be hit by a dull pickaxe?
Okay, now you're threatening me. What stands out to me about this is he does all this damage, but he actually loses, which is different. Curtis won everything so far, and everything just keeps going his way.
Well, he doesn't lose with the creatures, though, does he?
He doesn't lose with the creatures, but then he loses the fight that comes after.
The next one, yeah.
And he gets a little hurt, and then he gets a lot.
Oh yeah,
he gets beaten quite a bit.
Well, let's talk about this because he escapes from these creatures, and he kind of sees a light up ahead. It's the fire from the kind of the royal palace. Whatever exactly that is. We know it's really nice. There's jewels all over the wall. Curdy realizes pretty quickly, oh, this is, like, I'm looking at royalty here. Mm-hmm. And then he begins hearing a little bit of what's going on, and we pick up in the middle of a conversation of which we never really get the full context. But what is clear is that it is not just a wonderful, happy family gathering in the king's household here. It is quite clear that there is a lot of animosity between the queen, who is the stepmother of the prince here.
Yes.
And the prince does not really respect her. She's not really a big fan of him. The counselor will step in a couple times, just trying to kind of calm things down, but really just also appeal to the queen so he can be in her good graces. And it's really just it's not a happy family. I guess maybe if you were hoping that the goblins were getting along just fine, the way they speak to each other, again, kind of shows us a lot of their ugliness. Because in this exchange, McDonald will describe how legitimately ugly these goblins really are, and then we see from their behavior they're also quite ugly as well.
Right, which matches if it's your behavior that kind of defines your traits.
He wants to make sure that goodness is attractive and that evil or the darkness is unattractive. Mm-hmm. And so we see that here. What happens, though, because Curdy's listening and things are going just fine, and then it all kind of falls apart.
He slips. He literally falls into the middle of it.
He falls right into the middle of them, and it's really funny because McDonald says they're actually not afraid at first. And that's because they just never assumed that anybody could even get in there.
Yeah, they're stunned.
They're more just like, oh, something annoying has happened. Like, wait, that's a human with a pickaxe. And they assume that, ironically, not that, we know that they're planning an invasion. They assume that Curdy's part of an invasion into their world, which he's not necessarily. But it goes really poorly in that in the king's address to Curdy, he says something along the lines of, what are you doing here? And Curdy is very okay. We need to talk about this because Curdy technically does not lie. It'd be hard to really say that he is honest, but he says nothing that is false. The king says, "What right have you in my palace?" He said, and then Curdy responds with, "The right of necessity, your majesty. I lost my way and I did not know where I was wandering to." All right?
Technically true.
That is correct.
Now time for the cross-examination.
How did you get in? By a hole in the mountain. Also true. But you're a miner. Look at your pickaxe. I don't know why I made the Goblin British. Sorry about that, everybody. Curdy did look, answering, "I came upon it lying on the ground a little way from here. I tumbled over some wild beasts who were playing with it. Look, your majesty." And Curdy showed him how he was scratched and bitten. Again, that is true.
He did find it on the ground.
He did find his pickaxe
nearby,
and it was some of the goblin's creatures that did it. So again, would you say that he is being honest here? Because I feel like he's not really being honest here, although he really is being truthful.
I think he's being very shrewd, but he must know what's about to happen.
Yes,
I think both sides know.
Do you think it's wrong for him to lie in this situation?
No.
Go on, tell me more.
I don't think it's wrong for him to.
Why not? Why would it be okay to be shrewd in the way that he explains himself?
I think it buys him a little bit of time, and it also helps him ascertain the situation. And I think that there can be some really negative consequences to being too forthcoming with too much information.
I'm just intrigued by what's going on here because throughout, this season we've been talking about, and we just mentioned it a minute ago, this idea that MacDonald, and he says it in that aside, in some of those asides that are in some of the books and not in other parts of the books.
Which we found out about.
Yeah, we'll talk about that during listener feedback. But he tells us he wants to make all, what does he say? All girls are princesses, and they need to know that they're a princess, right? That he's pretty much trying to say that you couldn't be a princess if you aren't good, because being a princess means that you are good. And so he very much is clear about right and wrong here. And so it's interesting that he takes a little bit more of a nuanced perspective. I agree with you that Curdy is wise here, and he's very prudent, and he should do this. But it seems to a little bit, at least to me, maybe a listener feels differently, maybe you feel differently, it seems to me as though this is stretching our idea of what's good, because, or at least as a young reader, right? If I'm reading this as a young child, and you get to a point, with young kids, I do this with my kids, like my kids here in my house, not my students, where obviously we tell my son he needs to be honest. My daughter, right? She needs to tell the truth. She's already getting to the point now, even at 18 months, where I'll be like, "Did you just eat those goldfish?" She'll just shake her head no, and I'm like, "You're literally holding them, and there's some in your mouth. You just spit it up." You know what I mean? Like, so already lying. So
how would you define eat?
Yeah, she's just thinking 2 steps ahead of me. Yeah, she's just really intelligent, and we tell our kids, who are both younger than 5, we need to be honest. You need to be truthful, right? As they get older, one of the fun things I do when I work with my students is get to, okay, when are there times when honesty is trickier? We look at virtues with every book we read, and one of the books we read in the spring is Pinocchio. A lot of talk about honesty in that book, right? And one of the interesting things we do is we try to have, in one of our Socratic seminars, we ask questions about when are times where it would be okay to be dishonest. And usually at least 1 or 2 kids come with the very first thing that often comes up is like, what if you're protecting people during the Holocaust? Like, I'll have a 5th or 6th grader who brings this up. Like, if you were to lie to a Nazi, and they're more asking, they're telling me, like, well, that would be okay, right? Like, I know that I'm not supposed to lie, but I mean, surely that wouldn't be a sin, right? And they're kind of asking, right? And it's at that age, and those kind of maybe anywhere between like that 9 to 12 years old, where you're starting to be like, oh, this is a little bit more nuanced. And so all of that is to say, I'm actually intrigued by this conversation because I can't wait to read this with students in that kind of 9 to 12 years old range, where we bring up, like, let's talk about this. Is it, would it be considered dishonesty to say all of the most truthful, like saying everything truthful, but knowing full well that it is or hoping that it will be misinterpreted to mean something that you really didn't actually say? Because that's what Curdy's hoping, is that as he presents this information, it's going to be received. It isn't, but it's good that he's hoping it'll be received as he's just really lost. He had no reason to be here. Not, he was literally spying on us, right? Yeah. That's such an interesting thing to think about, because 9 and 12-year-olds are just not cynical like we are, and they're legitimately curious about what would be right and wrong. Where you and I are always like, well, I don't know, I'm just cynical, so I already feel like I have all the answers.
Yeah. I also feel like Curdy here has a bit of a smirk, like a Han Solo.
Oh, you think?
Kind of swagger where he's playing it up. He's saying all these things, and he's saying things that are technically true, but he's showing that he knows what they're asking, and he's giving them just enough to answer the question and tell what actually happened, but not give all the details.
He then says, the king says, well, we'll let you go. And Curdy's like, oh, thank you so much. He's like, yeah, I'm going to send 1,000 people to help get you back home. He's like, oh, no, one's fine.
Quite sufficient.
Yeah, one will be quite sufficient. And at this moment, this is when the rest of the goblins come in, and they're about to take Curdy until it's time for a little solo.
Yep. He bethought
Did
himself.
You want to sing?
Sure. This is my debut. He goes 10, 20, 30. You're also very dirty. 20, 30, 40. You're also thick and snorty. 30, 40, 50. You're also puff and snifty. 40, 50, 60. Beast and man. So mixty. And it keeps going down.
No, we gotta keep reading it. You're like halfway there.
All right. I can't wait to get to the word dundred. 50, 60, 70. Mixty, maxty, leventy. 60, 70, 80. All your cheeks so slatty. 70, 80, 90. All your hands so flinty. 80, 90,
You
100.
think it'd be flinty if it rhymes?
Flinty.
Flinty would be like maybe how you would think it'd be pronounced. But
I could see it with
a
a Scottish sound. It would be flinty. 80, 90, 100. All together. Dundred.
Let me read what McDonald says after this. It's really funny and also an extremely long sentence. I'm just going to read, by the way, one sentence here. The sentence that comes right after it. It's a very long sentence.
Take a deep breath.
It's really fun. But also I love that McDonald admits this about Curdy, or at least the narrator does. The goblins fell back a little when he began and made horrible grimaces all through the rhyme, as if eating something so disagreeable that it set their teeth on edge and gave them the creeps. But whether it was that the rhyming words were most of them no words at all, Curdy had made it on the spur of the moment, or whether it was that the presence of the king and queen gave them courage, I cannot tell. But the moment the rhyme was over, they crowded on him again, and outshot 100 long arms, with a multitude of thick, nailless fingers at the end of them, to lay hold upon him.
This is the part that you found so funny and not scary.
I know, it's just like...
Come on.
I think it's funny that the narrator acknowledges, like, well, maybe he should have just not made up words. Like, because I'll tell you, while I was reading through this, there's some Scottish stuff that comes up in here. And again, this is 19th century prose. And so some of the words that you're saying, I'm like, oh man, I just guess I don't know that word. Mm-hmm. I'm like, He gets to dundred. I'm like, man, I don't know what a dundred is. Yeah. I've never heard of that before. And then I'm like, oh no, he just is a made up word,
Yes. Because it rhymes.
It just rhymes. Yeah. I assumed it was a real word that we just don't use in the 21st century anymore.
Yeah, that's a safe assumption.
They fight together. Curdy attempts to attack the goblins on the head. Obviously, that doesn't work. He then begins going for their feet, and he makes a rush for the queen, which McDonald tells us he would not really want to do, attack a woman here, but it's a matter of life and death.
There's quite a bit of discussion about what he doesn't want to do, but being as gentle as courageous and not wishing to kill any of them is how it starts. And he turns the end, which is square and blunt like a hammer. And with that came down a great blow on the head of the goblin nearest him. And that literally sounds like how Batman fights in The Dark Knight.
Okay, but no. Here's my problem with that. If
I'm agreeing.
Is that
with you.
going to hold up in court? Like, no. You don't
No.
understand. I just hit the man on the head with a very large hammer.
Right.
It wasn't sharp. You can't say that I was trying to kill them.
I think I see the problem. You grew up on Looney Tunes, and so you think a pickaxe.
I was thinking Maxwell Silver
thing.
Hammer. Actually,
Yeah,
I was with the Beatles.
I think
but
it's
yeah.
actually like super tiny.
Wait, really?
Oh, it's this like tiny little pickaxe. You
No.
don't want to break the diamonds.
No, wait, no. Do you really think that?
No.
I was like, no. It's like I'm thinking Lord of the Rings dwarves walking there, like
Right.
Snow White or something like that.
Yeah.
This is, yeah. I know he's telling himself I'm hitting them with the dull part. All I'm doing is giving them permanent brain damage, and that's better, I guess, in his opinion, than
That's
killing
what's
them.
so funny to me is you're breaking someone's arm, you're dropping them, 2 stories, so
Yeah.
it's not enough to do that much. But come on, like this is
Like they'll have the hospital bills to never be able to financially recover from this.
right. Also, you're defining your own morality, so you're already
Now we're
in
just talking
trouble.
Batman. We're not talking about Curdy anymore. The kid's
I'm
12.
I was
so-
talking about Curdy at the end.
Oh, you still were at the
He
end.
is.
Okay.
He doesn't want to kill him, but he's deciding what's like. Killing would be really bad. At least I didn't lie.
So he then attacks the queen here, forgets about her very strong shoes, and so it all kind of falls apart here. She rams him up against the wall. She like picks him up, runs him across the wall like a battering ram, slams him in, and pretty much knocks him unconscious.
And then covers him in a pile of stones to keep
Yeah,
him
and then
there.
he wakes up in this tiny little crevasse, right?
Yep.
With just a glimmer of light being poked through. And the chapter ends with him falling back asleep, realizing there's really nothing he can do. He's locked up here, a prisoner of the goblins.
He sat down and tried to think, but soon fell fast asleep.
You're really not supposed to do that if you have a concussion, I'm pretty sure, right?
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking. And it's funny how all the modern stuff.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
kinda know. Do you remember the movie Stand By Me?
No. Never heard of
It
it.
ends with one of the characters who has grown up finishing the story on his computer.
Okay.
And he types the last word, space, the end, period. And
Do you
then
do space?
No.
Okay, good. You're normal.
No,
Okay.
I'm trying to save.
You try to do paper.
I want to have room.
Oh, yeah.
He then stands up, smiles, and walks away. And every single person in the class watching goes, save.
Oh, yeah.
Hit save. This is before Google Docs.
They
where it's
didn't
just-
have floppy disks yet, and so they didn't have the save button hadn't been invented
Yeah, there's
because you had to
nothing to
have
save.
a
You just-
floppy disk icon.
You just kept the computer on until you printed
Yeah.
it out. Yeah.
Wait, what would have been? Maybe some of our older listeners can help us out. We both were using computers in the 90s. What was a save? Was there an icon for save before floppy disk? What would it
No.
have been?
Because that was the first external thing that you could
They
save.
could save
Yeah.
to, yeah. Okay, that's true. You're right. They said tablets. They just had to, cuneiform, just
Yeah.
put it out in the sun to dry.
Hey, make a quick copy of this. Oh, there goes my entire weekend.
Yeah. Well, any other final things you want to say before we head into some listener feedback here?
Yeah, let's talk about what we learned about the different versions of the novel.
Yeah, we've got 2 short things I'd like to go over here. One is about Princess and the Goblin, and one is going all the way back to the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So, friend of the show, David Bates, reached out to us after, I don't know, whenever we mentioned that we had these 2 different copies of the book that have these asides where the author is speaking to the listeners. And here's what David wrote to us. He said, when Strahan decided to publish The Princess and the Goblin as a book in 1872, because it was first found in the magazine Good Words for the Young in 1870, he dropped the aside. So originally, let's just pause for a second. Originally, MacDonald had the asides when it was published in magazine form. When it's eventually published 2 years later, the publisher drops those asides. However, this is back to David, American publishers, Lippincott and Rutledge, both decided to keep them. So both versions ended up being published simultaneously. So both are the standard, but the one published in The UK did not have the asides, and kind of I mentioned the Beatles a moment ago, kind of like a similar thing where there were different LPs being released in the 60s. The ones from the UK eventually became the standard ones that you could find on like Spotify or Apple Music.
Was this
now.
a difference between stereo and not stereo, or did that?
No, this is
come
not
later?
a stereo mono thing, but like there were like the very first Beatles album released in the UK was Please Please Me, but I believe in 1963, I believe that same year, maybe in 64, I could be wrong here, there was an album released in America called Meet the Beatles. Then the second UK release from the Beatles was With the Beatles, which looked really similar to the cover from the United States is Meet the Beatles. And so they kind of went back and forth. The third album, I'm not going to go through all of my promise, was A Hard Day's Night in the UK. That most of those songs were put on an album called Something New in the U.S. But eventually, as things became more unified, I think it would have been like late 80s, maybe 90s that this happens, we kind of decided as a society, and by that I mean whoever just owns the rights to their music, just was going to publish the UK albums. I guess that's kind of what's happened with Prince and the Goblin, that most of the ones we're reading are the UK version, which is kind of similar to what happened with Narnia. Because remember how Lewis made some changes in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and most of those changes have reverted back to the UK. Remember how we talked about this, that there were some changes he had made?
Was it the Philosopher's Stone?
Stop that. I bring this up because I wanted to transition to the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, because we also got an email a little bit a while ago, but I thought it made sense to go over it right now, from a new listener, Josh Myers, who said he just started listening to the podcast not too long ago. He said, I have loved listening to your podcast on iHeartRadio. I have a question. I didn't know we were on iHeartRadio.
I didn't know either. That's
there we
great.
Go. Nice.
We have made it.
There you go. I have a question to ponder, though, about Reepicheep. Do you think he actually died, or was he brought up into Aslan's country alive? So let's go back to the very end of Dawn Treader there. Josh says, every time I read that scene, I'm reminded of 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 11 through 12, where Elijah was taken into heaven alive in a whirlwind and chariots of fire. I'm also reminded of Enoch, who walked with God. I don't know if any of the other listeners have brought this up.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always assumed that he just went to Aslan's country without dying.
Same here. I was just rereading that chapter a month or two ago with my class, and it's abundantly clear that there's grief and sadness from the rest of the crew, Lucy especially, at the very end of that. But I think it's more of because of his departure, not because he is dying. I'm in agreement that this is more of a 2 Kings Elijah thing than it is a death thing.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's interesting, because there's even some of that imagery there where you literally have the character going up into, think about the way that Reepicheep goes up on the waves, right? And then there's the interesting, you can contrast the chariots of fire that Elijah has, and then the giant wet wave that Reepicheep goes up on. I think there's some really clear, allusions to this. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think this is probably what Lewis might be thinking of when he's writing this scene.
Yeah, just different elements. That's cool.
Yeah, so I brought that up. Something I did, I think I've thought about before, but I guess we just didn't mention it when we were covering it. We were having so much fun. We had, that was Dr. Crystal Hurd back on, that was, I think, maybe the first COVID episode we recorded.
Oh, yeah.
Like the first time, I think it was early enough in COVID where you and I were still together, but or maybe we weren't. Maybe we would have been different homes. I don't know.
Yeah, because at the beginning we didn't know what we were supposed to do. Or
yeah, it's like we can't go to school, but like you guys come over here, right? And then that was.
Yeah, this will all blow over in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, Sarah came over and cut all of our hair, and that was the last good haircut I ever got. I mean, for months.
Yeah, I was just going through those photos. I remember that.
It was nice for me, actually. I think probably the best thing about COVID was it made me okay with the fact that I'm going to be bald one day, because have I ever told the story about how Anna literally pretty much shaved my head on accident?
No.
Do you not know about? Did
she tie you to the kitchen chair?
Yeah, no. She was just like, your hair's getting long. It looks bad. I'm going to shave it all off. No. We bought clippers like everyone else did on Amazon. It took like 5 weeks to get there because everyone had bought them, and I had asked Anna, like, hey, can you just help trim up? My hair's getting long. I need help. And so we were just going to do like a, I don't know, like one of the the higher numbers. It's not like a crazy haircut or anything like that. And Anna forgot to put the guard on.
Oh, no.
So she just went right in there on like the absolute lowest guard.
That's why we stopped hanging out in person. You were trying to
and so
grow your hair back.
She just did the one line. I was like, uh-oh. Like, it's abundantly clear she'd messed up. And what I ended up doing is this would have been like May of 2020. I just shaved my whole head for the most part. I did a buzz cut, but like the thinnest of the buzz cut you could possibly do. And then I wore a hat for months. And so our son was born during this time period. And all of my pictures with my son for the first like 3 months of his life, I have a hat on or I'm asleep and I look bald. And this is okay because my listeners don't know this. So why am I giving myself away? My hairline, it's going back a little bit, you know. Anna said the top of my head is a little bit thinner than it used to be as well too. And I've decided this is okay. I've experienced it before. I've survived. I will make it. I'm also going to grow a wicked awesome beard, I think. I'm going to do that kind of move.
And you had a plan to get 30 pounds, 40 pounds of muscle?
I need to get, you know what, when I was younger, it was like, I'll get 30, 40 pounds of muscle. At this point, I'm like, just 30, 40 pounds of anything, and I think it'll still look good.
Yeah.
You know, I think the muscle probably ain't going to happen, but I can easily put on 30 pounds. That's not hard for me anymore. You know, my metabolism slowed down a long time ago. All right. Well, Phil, would you go ahead and wrap us up for this episode?
Certainly. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can then listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, Ryan Smith, Andrew Trophy, Becca Brown, Christiana Line, and Ian Wooten for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be sent to hello@lampostlistener.com. Or you can leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. You can also find previous episodes, links, and book information at lampostlistener.com. We'd also appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps other listeners find the show and join our read-through. Thanks for coming along on this journey, and we will be back soon.